Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update concerning an absolute pivot from the President of the United States, Donald Trump. It's absolutely incredible. Honestly, my mind is blown. I was doing a live with Greg Terry when this came about, and we reacted to this live, and it's extraordinary. However, the caveat is Trump is only as good as his last 10 minutes and he can change his mind. But this is phenomenal. Now, the context is super important. Trump gave a typically unhinged, batshit crazy speech at the UN where he was talking about his poll numbers and how wonderful he is and how terrible everyone else is and how terrible the mayor of London is, blah, blah, blah. And then he mentioned Ukraine and Russia. And then he went from there to have a bilateral meeting with Zelenskyy. Okay. Now, while all this was happening, he wrote this Truth Social piece. So obviously he didn't write this, and you can tell from the language he didn't write this, but this is coming from the White House effectively. And it's not in accordance with what he was saying at his speech to the UN, right? He didn't at all reference this. He didn't hint about what was said here. Then he went to meet with Zelenskyy, and then he said some things with Zelenskyy that showed that his position might have changed. And Zelenskyy said he had the most substantive meeting he's ever had to date with Trump. So that something happened, and then this was released. And then he's had a meeting with Emmanuel Macron, and he references this. But it would take probably 20 minutes, half an hour for him to be like, he doesn't write his posts, obviously. But someone will be doing this for him, and he'll look them over, or he'll dictate, or whatever. He wouldn't have had time to do this. So this must have been prearranged. But I don't think he knew about it because he didn't reference it in his speech to the UN. So I don't understand what's going here. There's a lot of preamble because this needs explaining because it's so fundamentally changing the game. This is a game-changing statement from Trump. On Truth Social, he says, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win, all caps on win. It's the only capitalized word in this whole piece apart from NATO and his end sign off. So that's interesting. And win all of Ukraine back in its original form. Wow. We'll come back to this. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it's very much making them look like a paper tiger. When the people living in Moscow and all of the great cities, towns and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on in this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed and all of the other things that are taking place in their war economy, where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit and only getting better, Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form and, who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Holy cow. So this is just incredible. Let's go through it piece by piece because it needs to be analysed. So the first idea is that, and this is what Tim White says in his introduction to this amazing post by Donald Trump after meeting Zelenskyy, but it does imply he admits he was talking nonsense and didn't have a clue what was happening until meeting Ukraine's president. So he says, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, that is a massive giveaway there. So he didn't understand, he didn't fully understand, and he didn't get to know the Russia-Ukraine military and economic situation. Now, I've said to you for a long time, since the man doesn't take intelligence briefings, or very rarely, he doesn't read, he only gets his information from people around him, and he appears to be getting information on the war in Russia from Russia. So a lot of the claims he makes about the war come directly from Russia, and it makes us pull our hair out because you're like, what are you doing regurgitating Russian propaganda? But he simply doesn't understand the war. And this is an admission that he hasn't had a clue, really, of what's been going on in the war. He keeps talking about how all of Ukraine is rubblized and, you know, all these old spires have been, you know, turned into rubble and etc., etc. You're like, no, that's not what's going on all over Ukraine. There are areas where that is happening along the front lines, but there are vast areas where that is not happening. So he doesn't have a firm grasp of what's going on. And he's admitting that here. So he's saying after actually finding out what's going on, it turns out that Ukraine, with the help of the European Union, so he's not saying with our help, he's actually, you can read this as a message of him saying that he is going to extricate the US from direct interaction with Ukraine and Russia in terms of mediating. This is an exit strategy. This is an off-ramp. So he says, Ukraine, with the help of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. Now, we're going to skip the middle part. We're going to come back to that. But let's look at the end here, because it's even more astonishing. Right, he says, when the people living in Moscow and all the great cities, towns and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all the other things that are taking place in their war economy. In other words, he didn't know that, but now he does. Where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine. So he obviously didn't realise that, but now he does, which has great spirit and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form. So the original form really can't be just the 2022 lines. The original form has to include Donbass and Crimea. Right, that's the only way of sensibly understanding that. So he says, getting the country back in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. So it appears, at least prima facie, that Trump is advocating that Ukraine could even take some of Russia. Like, he's actually saying that it's within the realms of not only possibility, but also moral and political acceptance that Ukraine invades Russia. Like, he has no problem with countries flexing and invading other countries. There's no understanding of what's right or wrong. This is absolutely insane and incredible, and very, very, very good if he's going to stick with this. Because he is now talking about not capitulating to and appeasing Russia. He's not forcing Ukraine to do X, Y, and Z here. He's saying, with the help of the European Union, Ukraine can win this war. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. So he's slagging off Russia and their capabilities, saying they're not even capable of winning a war within a week that any other real military power would be able to. And as a result, they've been fighting aimlessly, which is to say that they don't have an objective. I would agree with this. That is rather aimless. He said this is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it's making them look like a paper tiger. This is very much what we've been saying for a long time. Now, in the live stream with Greg, I was talking about how Trump is a winner, or at least he always wants to be a winner. And he doesn't care much for politics or morality. So when he looks at the Russia-Ukraine war and says, who should we support? It isn't who is it right to support, because who has been harmed in a moral evaluation here, understanding that invading a country that's a sovereign nation is a bad thing to do, a morally and politically bad thing to do. He doesn't care one iota about that. He's like, who's most likely to win here, and I want to support them. That's, I think, what underwrites his reluctance to support Ukraine as much as he should have been doing. Because he keeps saying that, do you know how massive Russia is? It's 11 time zones. No, not many people know that it's 11 time zones, or that kind of rhetoric, where he's said that a number of times. And he's saying that Ukraine are insane for fighting against Russia. They're never going to win against Russia. Russia's a much bigger country. He said that countless times, and we've been getting so annoyed that he's just has this idea that the bigger country is always going to win. And therefore, he's not going to support Ukraine against Russia because they're just not going to win, and he only backs winners. So he's basically been intuitively backing Russia, but he's been supplied now with enough information whereby he realizes that actually Russia can't win, especially with their maximalist objectives. He probably thinks that, or he's probably come to a realization that Russia are not economically or militarily in a position to be able to win. He has been told finally enough information to give him a proper understanding of the war. And now that he understands that Russia isn't going to win, he's like, well, I want to back a winner. So it looks actually now like Ukraine, maybe because they've got these medium range missiles and drones and long range drones and possibly long range missiles, and Europe and NATO are buying weapons from the US, and they're also piling in a load of weapons themselves. And maybe I've just found out, so you haven't heard any talk about $350 million worth of American equipment, and Europe need to catch up, and Europe need to do this, and they're not doing anything. We actually haven't heard that recently. So I think there's a realization maybe that Europe are putting a lot of money and material Ukraine's way, to the tune of actually an awful lot more than the US has done. And it is having an effect. With the support from Europe, from NATO, and from the US in selling weapons to the aforementioned entities, Ukraine is in a better position to prevail. Russia's economy is tanking. All the canaries in the coal mines are suffocating, and it is not looking good. And he says that, look at the people living in all of these great cities not being able to get gasoline, and a war economy in all sorts of trouble. And he says Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble. So there is another capitalization there. So that's telling you that they're not just in a bit of economic trouble, that they are in serious trouble. And if the price of oil is kept low, and if sanctions are kept up, particularly from the EU and other allied nations, Canada, Japan, UK, on Russia, then it's not looking good. And this is a time for Ukraine to act. He's never said anything remotely like that before. This is the time to act. You're almost 4 years in a war, and he's saying, and now's the time for Ukraine to act, and they could win this war. This is such a fundamental shift that I'm struggling to understand where this came from, because this had to have been pre-written, I think, before his UN speech. Now, I think there's been a disconnect between the Pentagon and between military intelligence and Trump and his administration. He goes to meet NATO member states and their leaders at NATO summits, and he comes back a changed man for a wee while, right? And he goes, oh my goodness, they're telling me this, they're telling me that. He goes to meet Zelenskyy in the Basilica in the Vatican, and he has a changed opinion of what's going on. When he goes to these meetings outside of the Trump White House, or when European leaders come to the Trump White House and he's not surrounded by Stephen Miller and whoever else, then he's getting a proper understanding of what's going on. Here, this is a note written, a statement written after actually coming to some understanding of what has really taken place in Ukraine and in Russia. Now, so he gave the speech to the UN. He then went and had a meeting with Zelenskyy, and that was, I think, an 8-minute meeting followed by a 6-minute Q&A. There's no way he could have got all the requisite information in that time. So where is this information coming from, and who is actually taking on this information? I think there's been a disconnect between the Pentagon and military intelligence and the Trump White House, and I think that this might be explained by a reconnection there, whereby the US is finally getting proper information, or maybe it always has been getting proper information, but that information is finally filtering through to the White House. And somebody has written this in obviously a position of power that is shaping the US foreign policy going forward in a massively different way. This is a huge pivot. It's honestly so important, but it's only as important as the length of time that this is adhered to. So it could be that tomorrow they walk some of it back. It could be that there's disagreement that comes out of this. It could be that, I don't know, he starts going back to his intuitive defense of Russia and so on and so forth. But it is, you know, Defmon here as a source says Trump has no plan. He echoes whoever flatters him. Today it's Zelensky, tomorrow someone else. Nothing matters until he commits. That is true. Nothing matters until he does commit. But I can't see that this has come from an 8-minute conversation with Zelensky. And if it has, then he really is fickle. But he won't have written this. This takes some 20-30 minutes to write. Like, there's no way that is written just straight after meeting with Zelensky and then it's popped out on the socials and then he goes to meet Macron. Like, that is, I think, physically impossible. So I'm thinking this was pre-written, but then he did show absolutely no reference to this in his speech at the UN. And so therefore, I think, and then this is hugely speculative, but I think this was written by others and it was then shown to him and put out to True Social, and he's now having to react to this thinking where this isn't naturally or intuitively his thought processes. Like, I think he's intuitively beholden to strong men and dictators. Now, in the presses today, he has talked about not anymore really believing Putin. So Putin is not the person he thought he was, and essentially he doesn't, although he did say, you know, he was asked whether you trust Putin and he say, I'll let you know in a month. So there's still this kind of idea of punting it to the long grass. But I think maybe that's his intuitive speech going on there, without reference to this, which is written by someone else. So then he spoke with Macron. He obviously understands that this has been released on his behalf, and he says this as an answer to a question.
But most of you have seen the recent statement I put out.
So most of you have seen the recent statement I put out. It's a statement he put out. He's not saying the recent thing that I said or stated. You know, you could understand that as like a statement that was pre-written that I put out. But anyway.
But most of you have seen the recent statement I put out a little while ago, and I'm glad you got it. But I feel that way. I really do feel that way. Let them get their land back. Yep.
I feel that way. I really do feel that way. Let them, Ukraine, get their land back. He's never remotely said anything like that before. In fact, he said the exact opposite. He said they have to concede land. They will have to concede territory. They need to get realistic. And then Marco Rubio's had to go around and trot that out. And Marco Rubio earlier on today was trotting out stuff like the war in Ukraine cannot end through military action. It will end through diplomacy. That's what he said earlier today at the UN Security Council meeting. And then Trump releases this, which is in direct contradiction to that. Trump also answered that he's fine with NATO shooting down Russian jets. Asked whether the US would support that. He's like, well, it depends. But he's fine with NATO doing that. And Marco Rubio has said the opposite, that actually, no, we don't want to see NATO shoot down jets. But I think Marco Rubio is probably more aligned to this thinking than Trump is himself. And so Marco Rubio is now going to have to realign his thinking to what Trump has said. But this probably hasn't come from Trump. This has come from someone else. I don't know what the hell is going on behind the scenes here. But it doesn't matter at the moment because this is exactly what we want to hear. When you saw Zelensky coming out of the meeting or speaking with Trump or being asked questions after I think Trump had gone, and that photo shoot next to Trump, he was beaming and he said this is the most substantive meeting we have had to date. There's a moment where he's laughing about saying, I feel like I'm the President of the United States, as so many reporters were trying to speak to him. Now, so the intuitive Trump gives it a month, right?
Well,
so this is a month.
On your talks with President Putin, and do you still trust him?
I'll let you know in about a month from now, okay?
Do you still trust him? I'll let you know in about a month from now. I mean, that is rubbish, meaningless, vague, punting everything to the long weeds as he tends to do. But this is what he said after meeting with Zelenskyy.
This is an important one, and we have great respect for the fight that Ukraine is putting up. It's pretty amazing, actually. This is an important.
So it's pretty amazing, actually. He's now talking about respecting the Ukrainian fights and fighters and what they're doing. He's not really said that before. He's talked about how horrible it is that so many people die per week and how horrible it is that Ukrainian civilians die, although he doesn't often talk about civilians because it's a bit morally uncomfortable. He said that if Russian planes should be shot down if they enter NATO airspace, and it would sound like he would support other NATO nations doing so as well, although he was a bit more on the fence about whether the US would go and support other NATO nations. But you've got just pivots all over the shop. Now, I wonder, again, how much of this comes from Trump and how much of this is being dictated to Trump? How much is this foreign policy positioning? And therefore, who is doing this? Is this the Pentagon? Is this military intelligence? Is this coming from Elbridge Colby? Almost certainly not. Pete Hegseth? Almost certainly not. Who is writing this? Trump didn't write this. He can't write something like that. Right? He doesn't have the ability to do that kind of writing, I would suppose. So who is doing this thinking? Because it's such a pivotal change. This is spinning on a sixpence. You know, Trump and the US have turned on a sixpence today in a way that this was never on my bingo card for this month for Trump at all. I never would have thought I would read Trump saying something like this. Now, this is brilliant for Ukraine. Russia are already retaliating with lots of stuff online. Lots of anti-Trump rhetoric, I think, is starting to come out, but they've retaliated in hammering Kharkiv just over the border with all sorts of missiles and drones and whatnot. So they will take a military response to this, certainly for tonight. Ukraine are going to be trying to give back some to the Russians, and we're hearing lots on both sides at the moment. It's going to be fascinating to see what, say, Putin or indeed Lavrov, Peskov, Medvedev say back to this. And also what the propagandists say to this, because they were putting a lot of store in Trump. There's no doubt about that. He was their man. And then there are questions about, well, are we going to see genuinely whether Putin has any compromise on Trump? Because now's the time he's going to need to pull on that. Because Trump has done a 180 spin here, and this spells absolute disaster for Russia if Trump holds to this rhetoric and if he supports NATO. Now, you're not going to see the Americans give support to Ukraine. They will sell support to Ukraine. They are going to continue to support them, one would assume, with intelligence sharing and that kind of and also logistical help through NATO themselves. But I think they're just going to, as he says here, we will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do with what they want. Now, he says, I wish both countries well, which is a weird thing to say, I think, but it's kind of Trumpian. Yeah, absolutely incredible night of a change of tune. It's just a huge change of tune. But while I've been super excited about this, he is only as good as his last 10 minutes. So does this get changed? Does it get rolled back? Does he just himself diverge from this rhetorically? Does he go back to his intuitive pro-Putin, pro-dictator stance? Or are we seeing a changed Trump? This is too much of a significant statement to just be a kind of ambiguous two-line Trump late night Truth Social post. This seems to have been very deliberately constructed. And it reveals an awful lot. It reveals a massive ignorance into Trump. So maybe this isn't coming from the Pentagon, because it can't come from the Pentagon, because they wouldn't be so, I don't think, ignorant as to say after getting to know and fully understand you. So this looks like it's coming from the Trump administration, from the aides, from people around Trump. I don't know who it is. I'd be fascinated to know. This is a really significant night, or at least it certainly could be. Let me know what you think. I'll be fascinated. Take care. Speak soon.